So right at the top of this list, that isn't a list, is the idea that there's a huge benefit to your learning capacity for doing everything very slowly. And actually, Feldenkrais emphasizes that this is for learning, not for life. In life, we are not going to be going around doing everything slowly all the time. But in terms of learning, there's a huge benefit uh, that reflects this idea of finding those differences that make a difference. When you know how to do something, maybe you've had the experience of um, reaching out and catching something that's dropped very spontaneously without really planning your trajectory. Your whole self as one caught the thing in a way that if you had stopped and thought about it, you might not be able to do. And that capacity of integrating all the different elements of yourself into one clear action is something that people who master skills, particularly but not only physical skills, are familiar with the shift to when you can play one chord after another without having to look at your fingers to check where they're going. When you can swing a tennis racket and have the ball go where you intend, time after time after time. That you can download into your understanding a piece of choreography and reproduce it very easily. There are so many ways in which we learn to do something fast, but the process of learning it was much slower. And it's always, it's one of the reasons why, learning to do things with missiles is always a little more challenging because, in order for it to be a missile, whether it's a javelin or a ball or an arrow, it's got to move fast. So, this sort of contrast between the person with the dart holding the dart, aiming the dart, focusing the dart, and then when they're ready, no control over the speed of the actual dart if it's going to cross that distance and hit the dartboard. But in terms of learning, particularly how we move, the slowness has a huge benefit and is at the same time often an instinct we've lost. And I would say, having had a chance recently to watch my wonderful, wonderful niece beginning to figure stuff out, that even in these early stages of development, when we're particularly good at learning, when we're particularly good at learning to incorporate new strategies and abilities and capacities and concepts, all going in, that it isn't necessarily obvious that there's much slowness in some of the learning process that the child is undergoing. So I would say the moving slowly is actually an adult refinement of our early child learning processes. And it really makes it easier for an adult to start to add new skills, is to get the hang of doing things slowly. And I had already had been immersed in slow learning because I came to Feldenkrais via Tai Chi. So for me, the slowness made a lot of sense. But I will say that I've been teaching for more than 30 years now, and it is the thing that can take a while to make sense of. So I had little strategies in the class. I'll say things to people like, Feldenkrais practitioners are almost the only people out there encouraging you to do something slowly. So you're not going to get necessarily many other opportunities to see what it feels like to explore slowness in action. And I'll also say, and I think this is very true, until you learn to explore movement in class more slowly, you don't discover how well it works. And it's absolutely a superpower to be able to take something that you're doing and turn it into something that you can do very slowly. We have this lovely movement that we use in a lot of different ways, that's called the bell hand, and the bell hand can be described in lots of ways. I am always looking for more, but one simple way to think of it is that you're slowly opening, but not into a stretch, your hand, and you're slowly closing, but not into a fist. Sometimes I'll say all of your fingertips are moving away from each other at the same rate, but as slowly as you can comfortably do, and then they come towards each other, but they don't touch at the same slow rate. So the thing about making this sort of slow movement with your hand is it's not your habit, yeah? And if you begin to explore slowness, there won't really be anything you do habitually slowly. And the reason that you can access something particularly interesting with the slow movement of the hand that knows so much, even if you're not a particularly physically skilled person, you probably have a lot of things you can do with your hands on pretty much automatic pilot without having to think about them too much. Chopping things up, using a pen, buttons, zips, all these things that only really become problematic if we have an injury to deal with. All those things that we learned in those early childhood learning stages where we didn't really notice. Most of us can't really remember the long process of learning to tie a shoelace or manage buttons, all those kinds of things. All of that went on when we were in a much less self-observing mode. We were more or less taking everything in and enjoying the process of discovery without doing too much analysing or questioning of what we were discovering. So and that changes at the age of about 5 or 6. You start to be a lot more analytical, and one of the interesting things I think about the learning process and what makes us different from perhaps an earlier age than that is often that some children, because of the environment they're in, start to analyse the environment quicker than others. So that's already, I've gone off in a philosophical tangent, but the slowness thing is a bit like that. So this movement of the hand is engaging a lot of your motor capacity in your brain and you can go even slower, you can slow it down more and more and more. And if I slow it down to this kind of pace, now I start to feel my skin, I start to feel the air, then I'm moving through, I get this wonderful three-dimensionality because I'm giving myself time to notice more. I can feel more because I'm giving myself time to notice more. So when Feldenkrais says do everything very slowly, he means both the movements themselves, and he also means the pacing of the whole lesson. So in Feldenkrais lessons we explore something, often very motion related, but sometimes motion but in the imagination. And then we pause, and we often call those pauses rests. It's a little like rest in music. It's not necessarily the case that you're tired, particularly if you have been moving in this slow, attentive way. It's more about this difference that makes a difference thing again, yeah? The more you do something, the less interesting your nervous system finds it, the less different it becomes. The first time you do this, it may be the newest and most interesting thing you've done in a long time, but after you've done 2 minutes, 3 minutes of this, your brain thinks it's much less interesting than it was 3 minutes ago. And you can begin to drift. Your mind starts to wander, and that's always a good time to take a break. It's always a good time to refresh yourself. And you can refresh yourself. In Feldenkrais, we very often, commonly refresh ourselves by just surrendering back onto the floor, back into, like you're falling back into the arms of Mother Earth, letting gravity support you, letting go of everything. And then revisiting your internal scanning, noticing if that hand feels different from the other hand. Has what you've been doing made a difference to the sensation you're feeling? So this is the capacity that doing something slowly has, is to make something new, even if it isn't something that's very new to you, like your hand. So I'm going to pause there, and I'll be back with more fundamentals.